It is said that history repeats itself, but this lies in the heart of man, who does not cease wanting power over others, control mechanisms that ensure this, and the accumulation of great wealth for personal gain, and to ensure cooperation from others. If the playing field is leveled, these games soon ensue again on worlds such as Earth, where young spirits are learning how to interact with each other, sorting out whether to mature into empathic beings or to remain self-focused. If it is a true statement that history repeats itself, it is also true that no king is safe, as those clawing up the hill to unseat him are never at rest. Earth's recent history includes long-running dictatorships, murder by the millions, and countries driven to ruin before change occurs. But where the dictator's desire for power and wealth seem preeminent, it is economic issues as a whole that decide the outcome. In Stalin's era, 40 million Russians were killed to feed his sense of control and supremacy. And the Gulag lasted longer. But where the dictator's desire for power and wealth seem preeminent, it is economic issues as a whole that decide the outcome. In Stalin's era, 40 million Russians were killed to feed his sense of control and supremacy, and the Gulag lasted longer. By the time communism collapsed in Russia, the legitimate mode of business in the hands of the communists had been supplanted by the black market, a quiet economic civil war. Germany overreached and engaged all its neighbours at once, a fatal mistake made by megalomaniacs. Had the reach been shorter, neither Russia nor Britain nor the US would have engaged, despite 6 million Jews having been brutally murdered. Where megalomania, unrelenting greed for domination, was endemic in those directing Hitler, it was many decades of economic deprivation that pressed the people of Germany to cooperate, in the end a self-defeating move. Britain once ruled the waves, a tiny island exerting its influence in distant lands such as India and China. Yet it succumbed to such simple forces as passive resistance in India under Gandhi, where refusal to cooperate by workers won the day, and more recently in Hong Kong, because an economic giant no longer tolerated the pretense. The US achieved independence from Britain through bloodshed, but the inevitable outcome would have led to this result eventually. The tiny hand of arrogance from a tiny island simply ignored. African nations invaded for their resources and turned into colonies, and eventually puppet governments achieved independence through the force of their economic might, which was attractive to many. Again, an economic revolution. In South Africa, apartheid ran for decades, with the black man essentially a slave, before economic pressures from around the world pressed for change. Revisiting Africa, nations that were invaded for their resources turned into colonies and eventually puppet governments. They eventually achieved independence through the force of their economic might, attractive to many. Again, an economic revolution unfolded. In South Africa, apartheid endured for decades. The black man, an essential slave, before economic pressures from around the world pressed for change. China remains a communist stronghold, yet the ruling elite, who in the past purged intellectuals and whose prisons today are filled with political, not criminal, prisoners, are acquiescing for the sake of economic growth. The giant awakes, and control over the minds and awareness of the massive populace is weakening as a result. In contrast, North Korea is led by incompetence, which has plunged the country into starvation under the hand of a dictator who will party until his last countryman is in the grave. This will likely result in a palace revolution or a scuffle with a neighbor. In either case, a change in leadership. The lack of crops and food stores, an economic issue, will be the deciding factor. How does this history comfort those under dictatorships in place today, or those slipping into dictatorship as those in the US fear their loss of voting rights might indicate? If the pole shift is an opportunity for rebels to emerge, it is likewise an opportunity for palace revolutions or border scuffles. But the outcome among survivors will be driven by economics. Once again, the sword hammered into a plough by necessity.